Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And welcome to episode 63, the Getting Away with Murder show.
Okay. Tailor-made for me. All right.
Today we're going to talk about those situations, like when you work with someone who is considered to be so good at their job and so special and magical that they can do anything and face no consequences. Do you think that there are, like, what are some current roles that you can think of where that is the dynamic right now? Like, is it the AI expert? Like, who's the person that gets to get away with murder right now?
I mean, it's mostly in the tech space, where if you've got the correct bona fides, you could pretty much do anything in Silicon Valley. You come to work naked if you felt like it. Steve Jobs at one point thought hours were killing. I don't know. He got something in his head against showers and just stopped showering. And finally, it came up through the ranks. Like, clearly, if you're a Z-grade engineer, your opinion means nothing, but they complained and they kind of daisy chained up, and eventually they got somebody who was close enough to Steve, he's like, if I just eat this, I don't stink. He said, no, Steve, you stink. Really? Yeah, no, you stink. Everybody's talking about it. You stink. Not the guy to care about what anybody would say. He did start taking showers again.
And I remember in the days before AI, when advertising was kind of in its heyday, and I was working in advertising, the ECDs, the executive creative directors, they were generally people who could get away with murder. Now, to be fair, at the time, this was exclusively white men who were in these ECD roles. They often had good relationships with the clients, but they could sexually harass women around them with impunity. Sometimes they were, more than one was actively using illegal drugs at the workplace and coming back to work in a significantly altered state, and pretty much nobody did anything.
One of my favorite Silicon Valley stories is a photographer that I had worked with many a time, worked at a tech company as a photo plotter back when such things were necessary in technology. And he was working, 24 hours a day, days on end. And of course, this was fueled by crystal meth. And at one point, he'd gone to his boss and said, listen, I'm having problems. And the boss said, yeah, I know, but you're really killing it. He goes, yeah, no, I'm having problems with crystal meth. Now, many jobs, if you tell a boss, I've had a guy I knew at Adobe thought, I'm going to go on disability. Told his boss he had a problem with crystal meth, and they fired him. Why? Meth is not alcohol. So you don't get a dispensation for having a meth problem. They can fire you. It's an illegal drug. So this guy should have been fired, but his boss said instead, well, if money is a problem, he was going to give him a salary. He's essentially going to give him a meth budget because he was enjoying getting 24 hours a day, 4 days in a row out of the guy for work, which of course, fully, even in his adult state, that guy realized this is not right. This is not, and he subsequently quit the job. So,
well, and the reason that we're talking about this is we got an email from Nick. Thank you, Nick, for the email. Any of you that want to send in an idea for the show or a question, WTF@badbossbrief.com. But this is what Nick sent us. I work in the sales operation role for various companies, meaning I liaise between the freewheeling rock star salespeople and the more data-oriented, insight-driven teams like marketing, pre-sales, and dev. One thing I've noticed is that bosses always seem to treat the sales team with kid gloves, because they are the ones bringing in the money and building the good contacts. But this inevitably causes tension with other departments because the sellers basically get away with murder. How would you as a boss resolve this kind of tension? What would you do, Eugene?
It is hard. And it's hard when you deal with sales. It's especially hard because that's just a miserable job. Every month you could have a great August and it doesn't make a difference come September 1st, right? That's just the lay of the land. So if you have somebody who's a real earner, if they're not actively and aggressively breaking the law, these are the people that are fundamentally responsible for your paychecks. So it's okay to have people like dotted line or lower understand this. It's not okay for the boss to, the boss is sending a message. If you have sales like this, yes, you can take a month-long vacation. If you have sales like this, yes, I will lend you the company car if you have a hot date. Yeah, if you have sales like this, I will let you skip 4 days in a row because you're having a hang, whatever the case is. It sends a weird message, but as somebody once explained to me when I was having a similar situation at EQ magazine, who signs the checks, right? And the CEO. No, that's not what I'm saying. Who makes it possible for you to publish this magazine? Somebody once asked me. If it's not a subscription magazine, how are you paying for it? I go, well, the advertisers. He goes, that's your boss. So it's not, you have to, heed who pays you, but it's hellish on morale. And the reason why I said at the top of the hour that this was tailor made for me was because I've often been that guy. I remember specifically at Mac Life magazine, which I had been pulled into. They had hired me as a contractor at Future Publishing to build their adventure sports division. And I was great. I'm here. And they said, well, we don't really have it yet. They said, look, you're getting free work out of me. You got to pay me. They go, well, what about this? What about you come on as senior editor at Mac Life? I can pay you for that. And then you can develop, the adventure sports things, skateboarding, surfing, MMA. You can develop that for us on the side. And I go, okay, I'll take the job. But I wasn't really ready to take the job. I had a book coming out. I had tours and so on. I said, but I can give you as much work as if I was sitting in that office, early stage work from home. And I was doing cover story after cover story, in office or on the road. And eventually, though, the woman who was a creative director got annoyed. It's like, why do I have to come to work every day? And he's gallivanting about America, on tour. And he said, well, he's turned out 2 or 3 cover stories on the road. And he's, I don't care. And fundamentally got them to lay the law down for me and say, you're doing a great job from the road, but I really need you to do a great job in the office because I need you to help with esprit de corps, which I thought was unfair at the time. I mean, how many books am I going to have come out? I can answer that now, but at the time I didn't know the answer to that, and I had to service the book. So there are limitations. I was not a sales guy. What I was doing was not contributing directly to the bottom line. So they said, you can't do it. I knew I had a book tour coming up. I said, I'm going to do you guys a favor. I'm going to leave. And I left. But if I had been a salesperson, I would have gotten that person fired. Honest to God, I would have got that creative director fired because I'm contributing to the bottom line. I didn't have that connection with the cover stories and my role as a senior editor. And as it worked out, we never started an adventure sport. Your publishing went down the toilet, and so ends that story. But I've understood the situation from both sides, and it's a drag. But the reality of it is, like Mike Ehrmantraut said in Breaking Bad, you have to play the cards that you're dealt.
Right. Well, and your perspective as that rock star who can get away with murder is interesting because I've also been in that position where in a sales role, where I was making a lot. I was making more than the rest of the sales team combined. And it actually didn't protect me. Right. And this, surprisingly, it did not. It engendered so much kind of jealousy and discomfort that my boss actually ended up engineering my departure. Right. And so I do. That was a weird one. But I do think that.
Hold on. I have a quick question then. Is that company still in existence?
No.
And there's your punchline. Cue the clown music.
Exactly. But I think so. But that said, to go back to your initial advice to Nick about kind of this is a necessary evil. These people allow these people who are in the sales role to be treated. To be treated differently. I 100% disagree with you. And
okay, good.
I'll tell you why. So one is I was a salesperson. Early in my career, I did direct sales, usually for either tech or advertising, television stations, radio stations. And then I moved into tech, and then I moved into business development. So I've been in sales roles. I've managed sales teams. And
Right.
what I would say if I were the boss, and I also now work with sales teams as a consultant and a team coach.
Right.
And what I would say to this team entirely is you are a team. Salespeople, if you don't have the sales support, sales enablement, the devs that presumably make the product, you will not have leads and you will not have a product to sell. And those people are also valuable. Because I think that recognizing, and I've seen this, getting somebody that can bring in leads or offer customer service or do effective, sales enablement, which sales enablement is essentially like making sure that the salespeople have the marketing materials, the collateral, or whatever they need. Those people are also super valuable. And they also don't grow on trees. And so when I was selling technology, this was a long time ago, there was something that we called vaporware, which is a nice premise that didn't exist. So these salespeople would go out into the world and they would be really, really excellent salespeople, very, very talented people with really good connections in the business. And they would have a really nice looking demo. But the software didn't actually work. The product didn't actually work. And they would maybe get some interest, maybe even get, a small deal, but they couldn't close anything because the product did not exist. And so I think for the salespeople, I would say to them, if you don't have devs that are building a product I'm assuming software, but it would also work for hardware, anything else. If you don't have a team behind you that is building a competitive product and maintaining that product to the highest standards, you are essentially selling a kind of vaporware, and you will not be able to have return sales. You will not be able to have existing clients as a reference base, which is going to make your job 10 times harder. So that's the first thing that I would do, would be to shift the narrative and tell the salespeople, you're nothing without those people who are behind the curtain, and you need to get over yourself.
Oh boy. Have you actually been in a position to be able to employ that? Because I'm wondering how that would play out.
Well, yes and no, right? So what I think that there's a step back in looking at the situation. So if I were coming into Nick's workplace in my current job, which is a consultant and coach, and looking at the team, I do a couple things first. So one of the things that I have seen is that salespeople, and making generalizations and stereotypes, but having been a salesperson, I find that a lot of us hew to certain personality traits. One, we are very direct and not at all concerned about conflict. Okay? We take rejection all day long. People don't call us back. So we have relatively thick skins in a professional dynamic. And particularly if we are selling a product where negotiation is part of the dynamic and we have to do heavy negotiation, which most salespeople do, we can, to use a sports metaphor, throw elbows under the basket and have strong personalities and be aggressive where needed. Bosses who are conflict avoidant do not do well standing up to salespeople. And so that's part of the problem, is if you have a group of salespeople, and any good salespeople are going to have some subset of those qualities that I just listed. That salesperson is also going to be really good at creating a narrative that reflects well on them, right? So I own these sales. I did this, that, and the next thing. So most salespeople are going to take credit for the client relationship, the revenue, the ongoing success of the company. The salespeople are going to promulgate a narrative that all the financial success of the company is based on their team and their individual efforts. And they may have data and numbers behind that. They're, of course, going to minimize the fact that all those other people behind the scenes are also contributing, because it's an entire system. So the first thing I do is I try to work with the boss and be like, are you letting these people bully you? Are you standing up to them? Are you setting appropriate boundaries? And are you reframing the narrative? Right? Because a lot of these salespeople that say that they're rock stars And yes, I mean, I was a very good salesperson, but I also had a system set up behind me that allowed me to sell what I was selling and fulfill what I was fulfilling so I could spend my time going out there. And so I think that the first thing is to look at the system. And I would ask questions of, in this case, Nick's boss, whoever is responsible for this. And I would say, do you have just one rock star or do you have 3 or 4? Because if you just have one senior salesperson who is pulling in the bulk of your revenue, especially if the bulk of that revenue is from 1 or 2 clients, that's an incredibly risky, unsafe position for your business to be in.
There's a catch, though, right? You've identified, you have a rock star, and you talked about the rock star's team who makes their rock star status possible. But what about if the rock star, anticipating trouble down the road, publicly subscribes to the notion that their team is their team? So that the complaints, any complaints you might have about this rock star will never come from that rock star's team. All right. So if in the case of a very real world case of Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison, used to be the biggest law firm, well, in California, certainly, with divisions in New York and so on. And one of the guys there came and said, he wanted to make some really minor league change in the business from my point of view. And they denied him. And he said, okay, ciao, ciao. Went off to start a company called Venture Law Group, and it single-handedly shot Brobeck, Flager, and Harrison in the neck, and the company doesn't exist anymore. Why? Because his team, all these people that, who made it possible for him to be a rock star, knew that he was the guy who was signing their checks, and they loved this guy. And when he left, they left with him. So...
But see, then I think what you're talking about, if you have a salesperson who is a good leader, that's a different quality, right? So if you have a sales rock star whose only claim to rock stardom is that he or she is making his revenue dollar and then some, and they're doing it by cheating, undercutting other people, stealing other people's leads, unethical, whatever. There's a whole, you can get there on the good road or the bad road. If they're getting there on the bad road, then it is damaging to the business's reputation and to everybody that works for them. There are good salespeople, and I like to think that I was one of them, who do things in an ethical way, are excellent at their job, and the team that works for them that feels loyalty to them feels loyalty to them because they are a good leader. Right? Like the people that work for me, they were paid well, right? If we got bonuses, if the team did well, everybody got a bonus, right? I treated them ethically. I gave them training. I educated them. I was like, where do you want to be in 5 years? Let me help you get there. So what I would look at is looking at the ecosystem. Is Nick's boss in this case, do they offer competitive compensation? Are there bonuses that are shared by everybody in the team? Are they providing training and coaching and other professional development skills to bring up other people to sell as well? Because that's the thing. I have seen really good salespeople who will mentor, educate, train, help, support their team. Those are people who should be treated like rock stars. And they're also not sexually harassing the people that work for them and going out in the parking lot and getting high every day at lunch. Those two. So we've kind of redefined then what rock star is, because rock star clearly is not just making money, right? Right. It can be. And that is obviously going to be the metric. These are for-profit companies. But I think you have to look at the whole thing. But I think to get back to Nick's example, what he's talking about is that these rock stars who are, in quotes, these salespeople, everybody is, there's a lack of morale. They are getting treated differently. They are not being held accountable. So this is a dysfunctional system rather than a functional. Yeah. And I think it also looks to another, and I've seen this to get out of just the sales people dynamic. In a lot of companies, a client relationship is what is keeping everything running, right? Some kind of relationship. So
Right.
For example, I would imagine in media, if you're running a magazine, having a journalist who has very strong connections to, say, celebrities, that is probably important, right?
Yes.
So there's always going to be a kind of coin of the realm. Like, what is the gold coin?
Right.
In
Right.
Tech sales, if you know a bunch of CTOs and that you have long-term relationships with them, that is what people are going to buy. That is what is of value. In media, it's going to be something else. In public relations, it's something else, and whatever that might be, right? But I think looking at the key relationships, right? Whether it's government regulators or whatever, every organization has key relationships. And what you want to make sure is that all of the key relationships are not in one person or one team's basket. And what is surprising to me throughout my career, I have come into places and all the eggs are in one basket. And no one is recognizing that as a problem. Or if they are, they're not doing anything about it. And I think that's the problem with the kind of short-term thinking that we get into if we're only looking at quarter over quarter performance, is if, and I've seen a lot of advertising agencies where 80% of their business comes from one client. These are agencies that sometimes have, 100 people working there. And all it takes is a new chief marketing officer coming in at that client, and there's going to be a review, and you're, on thin ice. And yet there is, because of this short-sighted profit quarter over quarter, there's a disinclination to address the fundamental business problem of we need to change that ratio, even if it's 60-40, but you can't survive an 80-20. And so that's where I think you get into this cascade effect, right? Where the salespeople who own those relationships, the senior creatives, the whatever it is, whoever those senior people are who own those relationships have a disproportionate amount of power. Right. And so what the bosses need to do is the bosses need to become Machiavellian in acquiring some share of that power. And if they don't, then they're at the mercy of these, badly behaving rock stars.
Correct. Right. Yeah. What was something I've heard from, it was probably Andy Grove in memory. I want to say Andy Grove in my memory, but it was like, what do you say? Nobody's indispensable, right? No single, or like my great grandmother used to say, one monkey doesn't stop the show, So, that might be. I think it's healthier to think that than that actually be a real thing, right? I mean, I remember in the early days of Apple when the French guy, Jean-Louis Gasset, I think that was his name, I'm fuzzy now, didn't want to license Apple's operating system, which allowed Microsoft to make Bill Gates the second richest man in the world, right? And for a long time, every time, like periodically, they would track him down and you talk to him and say, how does it feel to, especially in the early days, like when I started at Apple, people would tell me, why are you working for a failing company? You remember, it wasn't until that jelly colored, desktop iMac, I think it was called, that the company had a really severe change of fortune. And he was like, you're working for this failed company. So every year they would talk to this guy, Gasset, and say, how's it feel to be the guy who shit canned a multi-million-dollar multinational corporation? And he was like, look, if you understand my position at the time, it was a good decision, but in the future. And of course, he turns out in the long run, Apple's much more valuable of a company than Microsoft. But every year they came to him, and essentially he was like that guy. He was a rock star and made rock star decisions. That one came back to bite you in the ass. So that's, in terms of Machiavellian, which you mentioned, I think if you're a rock star, it behooves you to build up a strong team. It behooves you to be a good leader so that you have people support. And it behooves you to make, like in the mafia, to other people around you look good as well. That whole, self-acknowledgement of star status is never going to help you.
Well, and the question too is what the boss or the organization needs to be very clear about
Correct.
what metrics they are using to determine rock star
Right.
status. If it is solely revenue brought in, then that's not a good metric, right? Because there's good revenue and bad revenue, right? Like something that's gonna be quick churn. So I mean, so I think being clear about, because when it comes to money, everybody is a little bit crazy, and they are in corporate worlds as well. You know, it's like, oh, look, there's dollars. It's like, okay, are these dollars that are going to be repeating? Are these dollars that utilize the company? Are these dollars that are moving us forward? Or is this just like a quick churn? Because the thing about salespeople is they get really comfortable selling one thing in one way. And if you decide that you need to, you know, over time, sell a different thing, sell in a different way, you are going to have to be very intentional, because it's going to be like trying to get salespeople to write with their non-dominant hand. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be weird, and they're going to complain bitterly about it. Right. But I've seen so many companies where they have to pivot. I mean, people who were reliant on one way of doing business that has now been completely revolutionized by artificial intelligence, right? They need to shift. You need to have that sort of nimbleness. And so I think looking at, because there are some rock stars who are genuinely talented, genuinely good and effective leaders. Maybe they are contrarian. Maybe they are difficult in that they don't suffer fools. Not everybody likes them. But there is someone, Eugene, for those of you that are listening, Eugene raises his hand like, yes, that is me. I think to a certain degree that is both of us, right? And the idea is recognizing there can be challenging personality attributes that can come along with someone who is very talented, doesn't have a lot of patience for stupid people or process, and is often right. Those people should be given a little bit of extra rope, as long as they're not doing anything that's illegal or terrible. You know, recognize talent and privilege talent, but don't give the same consideration to somebody who just happens to be in the right place at the right time, who is making some sort of superficial contribution, but isn't actually that important.
You know, somebody called one of my references, and my reference thought it was so funny that they called me and told me how the conversation went. And it was from some managerial position, I don't know, back in the late 90s or something. And they said, well, what kind of management style works best with Eugene? And he didn't expect the question. No, I mean, he should have. And he paused and laughed, and he goes, a very creative one. And it didn't, it was right on the line between almost sounding like an insult, which is why he told me he said it, and a really nice kind of nod to the fact that, I'm a pretty creative guy. And so, but in the end, proof of the pudding being in the tasting is, did I get the job or not? I think I did get the job. So it worked in that instance.
But I think that saying a creative management style is actually the best one, because what it means is that I like the idea of a manager co-creating with the person that they are managing, right? Because each individual is different, and a system will respond to the individuals that come in. And so saying, I want to create with you a management style and structure that is as flexible as it can be within the organization to take advantage of your strengths and mitigate your weaknesses, which is inherently creative. And it's not that hard to do, but we have so many mindsets and so many, consultants with their flowcharts that we miss the fact that these are human beings who are operating in the messy field of human beings trying to cooperate with one another. And there is a lack of stability there. And the more that we can go with that creative energy and exploit it, the better we're going to be. And I think a lot of those very talented people don't like having to go into somebody else's very structured box. So for those of you that are listening, and hopefully,
Right.
Nick, that was helpful. And that's all we have time for today. If you, like Nick, have a question or want some advice or have any ideas for topics for future shows, WTF@badbossbrief.com. And we will see you in a couple weeks. Goodbye.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's number 3, on Instagram. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. We personally answer every submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.